And we're going to dig into bookinfo, which isn't completely deployed yet. We just have some stubs out there. So if we actually look at what's currently deployed, and then we look at what's deployed in the past 30 minutes, we'll notice we see our bookinfo application, but it doesn't look like what you saw in that slide I showed you. It's actually completely isolated. We have two non-functioning bookinfo applications that are in these two clusters, but they're not connected. So we don't have a global mesh deployed quite yet. And that's really what we're going to start out to do at the outset. So in my window here in the lower right, I'm just going to execute this command that is just continuously hitting what would be my global endpoint. And right now we're not getting any response. So we see zeros coming across the board. So let's actually apply a configuration, apply the actual policy to the service mesh, and watch our management plane distribute this out to the clusters. And to do that, I simply apply a YAML file that has a very terse description of how we do ingress and how these services are going to route to each other. And we'll see pretty quickly, since I'm applying it all at once, we'll have a couple 503s, but now my application is starting to get 200s. I actually should have showed you the config that was in the cluster beforehand. There actually was nothing. Right now I'm logged into GKE East. So that's this cluster here on the right side on our East Coast. And what I should have shown you is that previously this command of getting my gateways, virtual services, and destination rules would have been empty. And 29 seconds ago, we see a bunch of Istio configuration that was distributed to all my clusters that are participating in this global application. So hopefully I talked enough. Our metrics should have been now flowing in. And when we begin to look at the services and the topology, we can see right away that now this services dashboard is lit up with metrics indicating that we have traffic flowing through these. But what will be most interesting if we look at our topology. You'll notice now that we see traffic flowing. These are all connected. But as I said at the outset, once traffic lands into a given cluster, it's going to stay there. So we have what I would describe as an application edge gateway. That is what actually resolves my application. And from there, it's participating in a global mesh spread across these three clusters handling our traffic. And I can show you in a browser that our application is actually running. A few of my requests might be slightly slow because I actually have one of my services configured with some bad configuration that kind of shows us how we can pinpoint errors at a later time. As I refresh this, I'm getting round robin probably across both of my my data centers, and I'm getting my bookinfo application delivered to me. Now, I'll point out something really interesting to you. If we go back to the home page of the bookinfo app, you'll notice this kind of tells us our service configuration. My details endpoint, take a look at this URL. So it's details.mesh.local. So that's not a resolvable FQDN that we would be able to route to from my local workstation. This is only an internal domain that our global net mesh knows how to handle. And so that's going to make our detail service resilient across all of our clusters. And so let me show you something really interesting that actually gets pushed out in this configuration to make this work. And so our management plane ends up pushing out the configuration and endpoints of our global mesh. So if I take a look at all of our service entries within the mesh, you'll notice our management plane delivered to this local cluster, which is in the GKE East, some configuration that's related to details.mesh.local, which is where my details service is running. And that configuration that was delivered is telling it, well, if you're local, so if you're in US East 1, you probably want to use your local gateway, which if you look at the IP address, this is going to be my local Kubernetes overlay network. It's a 10.x network. And then we also have an entry for GKE West, which is instructed to be a remote gateway. And we can tell by the IP address, this 34.82 IP, this is something that is remote, right? This is actually a routable IP address. And so if I go back to what our application looks like, that's what keeps our traffic once we hit our gateways and once we hit our product page, which is kind of what serves all of our traffic, it keeps it local. So let's simulate a failure. So we're logged into GKE cluster East here. And so let's actually pretend that our detail service here in East, maybe we rolled out some bad configuration. We lost infrastructure, which caused a temporary outage of our pods. Something causes that to disappear. So to demonstrate that, let's just scale our deployment to 0. So this is kind of a little bit of a contrived way to simulate that failure. So that's going to kill my pods. We'll see 200 responses continuing to flow. We shouldn't see any blips in our errors. We can take a look at our pods in our namespace. So this guy's terminating. He shouldn't be handling any more requests. And so if we go back and refresh this, we should notice a failover took place.